Matthew. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, man. You guys have some grooving music in that startup.
That's a friend of mine, Andy, who's quite the artist. I mean, he paints, he writes music. And anyway, we had a song that we weren't probably supposed to be using, so he offered to write up a quick intro for us, and that was his work. So
Amazing.
kudos
And
to
I
him.
and I love the explosion like background as well, which I often use the metaphor in, composting, right? It's like this like thermonuclear explosion of life, you know.
Love it, dude. Love it. That's a great
So
way of putting it.
yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I was in Ken's cafe a couple of times, and he's like, "You got to get on Soil Matters," and I said, "That's my roots. Let's do it."
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, welcome aboard. And typically for new guests, I ask you to introduce yourself, tell us your background, and how you ended up here. So take it away.
So you guys can check out my bio. I think Ken's got that to put up, but I'll just be kind of brief because it's been it's a long story, but essentially, go back about 14 years ago. I knew nothing about any of this, living system stuff. I was a DJ, a hip hop DJ, actually, a turntablist. And, I rapped and I went and did shows and I was managing bands and doing this whole, thing. And, yeah, completely not in this arena at all. And then things were getting weird, in the world as they've gone many, many, times in history, and just some stuff that was like concerning to me and thinking about getting to the age where I had kid, a daughter at the time, and I was thinking about long term and thinking about just being more self-sufficient and being more resilient in the world, and then kind of like got into growing my own food and stuff, coming from like a prepper sort of mindset originally, having like a heavy military background in my family. Like it was more of like this kind of prepper mentality, but I always saw the like you can't just store food, like you have to actually know how to grow it and be I was a Boy Scout. I was in this Christian group called Royal Rangers, actually, which is like Boy Scouts for the the Christian church, when I was young. And so I was very much into like understanding how to take care of yourself and survival and that sort of stuff. And so I started growing my own food and kind of just like went down the rabbit hole of I never wanted to use chemicals or anything. Like I always knew that inherently wasn't right and wanted to grow as the most natural way as I could. And then I came, through research, it was like compost and but real entry level stuff, right? Like everybody usually goes through. And then natural farming sort of came from Matsubana Fukuoka, The One Straw Revolution. I read that. A good buddy of mine who's like a naturalist, he gave me this book, and that kind of like opened the lid into this world. And I was living up in the mountains, Berry Creek, California, and so I yeah, I was up there and I was off grid, and I started playing around with stuff. Failed miserably at first, and then started to play around more and more, trust more and more these ideas of looking at nature as the guide, and sort of designing like nature. And then I discovered food forests, the term food forest, and kind of like went down that rabbit hole. Found permaculture, and then the wildest thing happened is like I took my PDC. I was so inspired by all of this stuff that I'm learning through the last 3 years and kind of having a spiritual journey myself, in a way, disconnecting from Babylon, kind of just disconnecting from society, having a hard reset. And I was like, yeah, like I want to get into this, and I want to teach people what I've been learning too, because it's really working. And so I ended up getting a grant for a school, and I was starting to put stuff online. Well, none beknownst to me at the time, but Dr. Elaine Ingham actually bought a farm that was 5 minutes up the road from my property. And she showed up to one of my events, and I didn't know who she was at all, like never heard of her before. And she came to my event and waited to the end and like came up and introduced herself to me. And and I said, interesting, like this is what you do. And she said, yeah, I'm starting a farm up here. It's going to be a research facility, whatever. And I'd like to offer you a job. Now, it was pretty amazing because, like, I still didn't know who she was, but I had just had this project get cut off um, due to like local sort of, how do you say it, mountain bureaucracy, kind of uh, good old boy mentality stuff. Didn't understand what I was doing. Thought it was crazy. Thought I was creating weeds, and the whole thing, like this chaos garden, that I'm starting. They didn't quite understand the cover crops and the water system, earthwork stuff that I was doing, and it was like, oh, you got trip hazards and weeds. Like that was basically how they looked at it. And I ended up, so it was like such perfect timing. And then I got the job with Elaine, and I started telling a few friends who were in this arena, and they were like, "What, Dr. Elaine Ingham?" And I had to research who she was, and it was like, "Whoa, that's crazy." So she put me through all of her composting techniques, and also research. I learned how to do the on the ground like research. Uh, uh, and everything. And so, so I worked for her for a year, and then went through the whole. In the time, it was called the Life in the Soil School, which is essentially was like the original soil food web school. And really went deep on all that and started to see the results. Really loved making thermophilic compost, and kind of like dove deep into like all the little details, taking my permaculture systems thinking, element analysis, like inputs to outputs approach to looking at that whole thing. I was able to like really quickly come up with ways to um, efficiently organize waste products, and utilize things into a thermophilic compost system. And then I've kind of broke off from her, sort of very specific techniques that she taught, and I've created a lot more what I would call like just really user friendly, sort of down to earth stuff that allows people to enter in different ways. um, but yeah, can also just that was kind of the short long version. But now I'm a permaculture. If you were to say what am I, I'm a permaculture educator, consultant. I do some design work, but it's mostly just to enough to get something going for the client. And then I got my landscape contracting license about a year ago to actually legally implement the work now, by California law standards. And yeah, and so I mainly like focus on that. I teach a school garden program locally. I've started a bunch of different things, nonprofits, an ecosystem restoration camp after the Paradise fires. I'm right near Paradise, California, and other things. But I just do wherever I go, wherever the energy leads me. And right now, it's mostly in fire, the world of fire, because that's I'm in Butte County. 50+% of our land mass is burned over the last 7 years. And so I'm very much adapted to fire and stuff. But in the base of all of this, uh, the microbes, right, were what got me started. I mean, literally right at my beginning of all this, and thinking about things as most of us end up is like what's the cause, right? What's the ultimate fallback? What's the sort of the first layer of life systems? And it always comes back to the microbes, and that's why we come back to this.
Oh man, great journey, dude. Great
Yeah,
journey.
it's been
Uh,
yeah, it's
I
wild.
I ended up kind of doing a reverse of that. Well, it's like you said, like your story. It could be very lengthy, but bottom line was I got into breeding fish when I was in my teens and 20s, and figured out a relationship between aquatic plants and fish. And then I got married, and my wife didn't like the smell of my fish tanks, and so those got put away. You know how that works. Um, and then went through life, working, eating, sleeping, had some kids. It was all about my family. And then my wife went sideways and divorced me, took everything away. And I basically ended up in a ghetto in East Boston and was like, I gotta rethink my life. Like what makes me happy? Like I made fuck tons of money, dude, like too much. I spoiled her. And then I told her, I said, 2000, there's going to be a disaster. All the people I was working for at the time were billionaires. And they're like, there's going to be a financial crash and you need to pay off your, loans and your mortgages and just buckle up. And that's what really caused the divorce was me, saying that we need to sell things and put money in the bank. But needless to say, all things happen for a reason. So in my darkest times, I was like, I loved breeding fish and plants, and that was that was all my life. It gave me so much happiness and joy. So I started looking around and found this event called the Second Annual World Aquaculture and Aquaponics Conference, and I was like, "Whoa, what's this all about?" And so I went, and I ended up rocking out with like top stars of aquaponics and aquaculture and made good friends with them. And that's what started the journey. So then, a few years later, 2010 comes, and a buddy of mine who was teaching organic land care and landscaping on Long Island kept telling me, you got to meet Elaine. You got to tell Elaine what you're doing. You got to meet Elaine. So finally one day I was like, all right, enough. Where is this Elaine? He's like, at Rodale. I'm like, okay. So I call Rodale and I say, hey, I need to speak to Elaine. She gets on the phone and I say to her, Jeff Frank keeps bugging me to see you and tell you what I'm up to. Are you around tomorrow? Can I come meet you? She said, sure, come on down. So I had no idea, like you, who she was. No clue. It wasn't until probably 3 months in my relationship down there, because right away I gave her a vial of my fish manure that had been stabilized or fish mulm. And she looked at it in the microscope. And she just was like, oh my God, where did you get this? I'm like, well, it's fish manure, right? She goes, you can't go behind a fish with a pooper scooper. How did you get it? And I told her I built this radial flow solid separator to put the clean water back into the fish tank and to settle out the solids. And, I knew in the past that the solids work great on plants, but I don't know why. And that's why I'm here. I want you to tell me why.
Mm.
And so she's like, well, do you have some more time? And I was like, yeah, I'll stay tonight. And, because I lived in Connecticut, not in Pennsylvania. And we'll work again tomorrow. And so she laughed at me. And that literally turned into like this journey for 18 months. But about 3 months in, she asked me to stay on a Saturday because she had a microscope class. And so I was sure, I'll help you. I was very proficient with putting them together, breaking them down, and operating them. So, I was like, sure, I owe you everything, Lane. Why would I say no to this? So I was setting up microscopes at 7. People were starting to file in. The class didn't start till 9. And I just heard all these people buzzing about Elaine. Elaine, oh, I brought my book. I'm going to have her sign it. I'm like, who is this person, right? At the end of the day, like everybody, kind of petered out. And I was there cleaning up, putting microscopes back in boxes and stuff. And I was like, Elaine, who are you? Man, you had this room buzzing. There's people from all over the freaking world that came to this class.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And she said, I'm Dr. Elaine Ingham. I invented the soil food web, which I've been teaching you about for the last 3 months. And we just hit it off from there. So, and then I learned about, all these other methods, whether it was, one straw revolution, Korean natural farming, biodynamics, permaculture, like all of them just kind of fell in line. And, it's always been my biggest bitch, dude, that we're all on the same friggin' team, but we all fight each other. We're all campy. And it's like, no, you don't need to be campy. Sure, you can use some processes from biodynamics or some permaculture theories or understandings, soil food web and all is one straw and natural farming, Korean natural. I don't care what you call it. It's all similar, and it's not one size fits all. But you guys got to work together. That was all due to conferences that I was putting on at the time, and we get all these different camps coming in and then preaching their shit instead of like being a part of like, well, hey, we're all in the same boat more or less, right? So
So do you know the wardrobe analogy?
no,
Permaculture wardrobe analogy. Okay, so really, and this is a great opportunity because I love to make the distinction of this. So permaculture, there is no such thing as a permaculture technique. No such thing. There is no such thing as like a permaculture garden or a permaculture anything really like that. A permaculture how to. So permaculture, the analogy is that permaculture is like a designing a wardrobe. Um, the hangers in the wardrobe are all the techniques, and so based on your situation, the context of whatever situation you're in, you choose what techniques that apply to your situation. That could be biodynamics, could be aquaculture, could be thermophilic composting, could be worm vermiculture. It could be whatever it is. Now, what permaculture is it's a design system. So what it is it's a way to organize techniques. It's a way to, and one of the things that I loved so much about it when I really understood that, because I always, and like everybody, when they come into it or they've heard about it or whatever, they think of permaculture as a type of technique. And there's a lot of grabby stuff on the internet, the clickbaity and kind of, because you have to unwind this westernized mindset that we have already, to get into any of this stuff anyway. So it's like people will say permaculture garden or permaculture food forest or whatever, right? And there's a lot of stuff through permaculture design that's been created that's affiliated with permaculture design, but it's actually not a technique of permaculture. It's just a technique of that person who was using permaculture design. But it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with permaculture. Um, and but permaculture is, how do you choose what techniques are applicable for this? So it actually does bring everything together. And there's not many teachers, there's not many permaculture, even people that have taken courses and teach and stuff in permaculture, there's not a ton of people that I hear really talking about this. And so I think it's really important to talk about it. It is that one that says almost anything in the entire universe. Okay, this is what I like to say is like, if aliens landed tomorrow, okay, I'd be picking their brain on techniques that they use and seeing where there's application potentially. It's like literally everything, including, and this is going to be one that gets people all fired up, even GMOs. How, oh my God, you said GMOs. Why would you use a genetically modified organism, right? Well, you might use it in a desert environment as a cover crop to build biomass to then out succeed with an organic system. Okay, for instance, you might use GMOs on like another planet, or in a controlled environment, again for something like biomass or whatever. What the point is that every single tool in the toolkit is up for grabs, and it's dependent upon context. And yeah, so that's my little pitch there for permaculture. But it's not a technique, it's not a it shouldn't be this fighting. But words are a powerful thing, and people like to use words, and they like to feel like they're part of some specific camp or something like that for some reason. I don't really understand it myself, but it's definitely a thing.
dude, it's a real thing. I mean, when I started diving down the permaculture rabbit hole, I never heard this shit. What you said was beautiful, dude. because everybody grabs that hanger and it's, I have this hanger and you have to do it this way. That's what
Mhm.
I ran into in permaculture. And
Mhm.
I got frustrated with a lot of these guys because, I was there to participate and to understand and unravel how this is all connected to what I already knew, but I didn't know how to explain it. Like I
Mhm.
understood berms and swales. I was doing that shit when I was a kid,
Mhm.
and yeah, I just got lambasted with, oh no, you have to do it this way, this way, this way. And I at the end I was like, I don't know if you believe in climate evolution and understanding that the Great Sahara was once a savanna,
Mhm.
and the Midwest, New Mexico and you know Colorado, or not Colorado, the southern part of Colorado, and
Mhm.
all of those southern states in that corner west of the Rockies were also prairies. There are pictures of guys on freaking horses with only their heads sticking up above the grass, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
what is that now? It's a barren desert, right? There's hardly anything grows there but scrub.
Mhm.
And that particular example was exasperated by humans by tilling and farming,
Yeah.
but it was already started, before we came in and sped it up. And I go, so you're sitting there preaching about, trees and, well, you got to grow the trees and then the understory for us. And I'm like, yeah, but what happens when the rain stops? Right? You
Mhm.
can't
Mhm.
pick your trees up and move. They're
Right.
going to die, right? And so I got like pissy with the hierarchy of permaculture years ago. And so again, it's a pleasure to have you and explain it in that methodology that no, we're all in the same camp, man. Just pick the hangers that are working for you, but don't disregard the other hangers because there's a lot more to them than you appear to see. And so, that was a wonderful explanation. It gives me hope that, like these camps, like the Korean natural farming camp that fights with soil food web camp, that there is hope for, some common ground, especially during crisis, right? Crisis tends to bring us together. And at that point, you really don't have a choice but to say, oh, shit, can I have some of your, microbial solution or some fermented plant juice, because I don't have the ability to make it and I need to make some good compost or I need to feed my garden. And so, I think I wish more people spoke about it in that manner and not about, oh, this is my hanger, right?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so the big one is like, and I think this is probably the most important conversation in the whole regenerative world right now, that I and everybody I talk to, I have this conversation with them, to say, like we need to spread this more. It's that we need to be focused on the context, and to um, understand the how is the least important piece of anything that we do. How to do something, the YouTube, the like I mentioned, clickbait, the 5 steps, to do this or whatever. And like, whatever this thing is, I mean, I don't care what camp it is. I don't care if it's Korean natural farming, soil food web, whatever, any one of these ideas. And that's just, and people within those will all have different ideas anyways, hence context. But like, um every one of those needs to be adapted and changed for its local context and environment. And every single person is going to should come up with a slightly varied version of anything technique based out there. And so the why, the when, the where, and the who and all that, that's the important stuff, so that you can come up with your own how. You have to come up with your own how. And the big thing is, like, it's a hard sell. And like, when I do a consult for a client, most people want me to just say what to do. on their property. Like, just give me a step-by-step guide, whatever. And I tell them I can't do that, because if I did that, I'm disservicing you. If I give you a step-by-step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you how to come up with a step-by-step for yourself, and not just come up with step-by-step, but realize there is no step-by-step, to realize that you're going to constantly change that. It's all got to be done in pencil. It's all got to be reevaluated every week, every month, every year. It's always got to be looked at. There's going to be so many evolutions in that system. You're going to come up with, uh, a novel way to do every single thing. And you're probably going to come up with new stuff that nobody's done ever before, because that's the only way that anything can happen. And so, like, any broad scale approach, that's why one of the things I love about permaculture, and the way I've been taught, by the way, Jeff Lawton, on the original Bill Mollison track, that's who my teacher was. And that's who I would hold in high regards to, like, keeping this framework of this conversation we're having. And I think it's so vital, because it's a unity thing. It's about unity, and nature is like that. And it's about adaptability, and it's about no one system is the same, and that the biggest solution is 1 yard at a time, or one small space at a time. It's not going to be broad scale approaches, although don't sacrifice the good for the best, right? Like, you need to also have good out, doing good for large scale things that might not be the best. You still need to do it, right? And we need to get wins wherever we can get it. But, like, getting this critical piece of, like, every piece of land is different. Forest prescriptions, talking about fire, like, forest prescriptions don't work, especially if it's people that have never even been to that place, and have no localized context, have no relationship, because it comes down to relationship, having a relationship with these things. And so, yeah, I mean, when I work with a client, um, and they fill out first thing they do is I give them a questionnaire, which is like 50 questions. And what it's doing there is it's giving me as much possible information about the history of the land, the local climate, the energies that affect the site. It gets them starting to think like this way. It also then so I'm filtering my design based on the land itself, but then the client, and their wants, right? And then I'm also looking at physical abilities, age, and over time change. So, like, looking what their kids want, looking at, like, over a longer period of time, stretching time to see how can we design for future. Because, like, a lot of people, they're in their 60s, right? And they retired, they want to do some cool thing. So they call me and they say, hey, I would like to do this really awesome, sustainable, regenerative, design on my property. But they're not thinking, like, in 10, 15, 20 years, your lifestyle is going to change big time. And so we have to actually design that also into the system. So that's where I come from with a lot of this.
Dude, preach, motherfucker, preach. That was fucking beautiful. I swore 3 times already tonight. I'm trying to work on that. Some people say swearing is a sign of extreme intelligence. Other people say it's a sign of extreme stupidity. But needless to say, I consider it to be passionate.
You gotta add certain words sometimes to add the emphasis.
Yeah, and again, like, you're so right about, like, the questionnaire and everything in pencil, because it's a living document. Whatever you're doing is a living document to help you, kind of like a roadmap to make decisions when things happen.
Right.
And so I think that's an amazing approach. I mean, I have a different approach because my client base is completely different. I'm I'm a restorative guy. Like I get called when the stuff goes down, sad, really bad.
Mm.
I don't get the opportunity to be creative per se. I mean, I get to influence a little bit of creativity in saying, hey, if you did this, that would affect this, this, and this, and you would have less of an issue in the future. But as far as like, I used to be a design build company, and that was, I love that, man. I love sitting behind my drafting table and drawing, you know, beautiful how do I call them, expressions
Mm.
that the client gave me, like their dream, and then to be able to put it on paper and then show them, and then actually physically be able to build it and have them walk through the space. Dude, that was amazing job, right? And
Mhm.
blessed that you get to have that opportunity to live that world in this lifetime is awesome. And that in many ways I miss, because it's not always fun coming in to mismanagement or a crisis circumstance. It's a lot of pressure, and money is always an issue, and you have to be like, all right, look, you have two choices: time or money. Either you give me a lot of money and I make it happen real quickly, or we take our time and it's going to happen slowly.
Yep.
If you don't have a lot of time and you want it right now, it's going to cost a lot of money. Sorry. And
Yeah.
if that doesn't go well, then I take it as, okay, I'm not supposed to be working for this person anyway, because it's going to cause stress and
Yeah.
pressure and things that I don't want in my life. Dude, I'm 60, pushing 63, right? And I've gone out of my way to get rid of all of the energy sucking leeches in my life and narcissists in my life, because I want to live happily ever after, bro. And
Yeah.
when I get up and apply, products to these trees and have them come back to glory, that is so rewarding. So I'm over the drama and the stress from the
Right.
negativity of people around me. And so I don't know. It's just a breath of fresh air to have someone like you who's really got a wonderful set of directions that can be morphed along the way to help people really understand what it is you're trying to get accomplished, and then force
Mm.
them to think about their consequences. So kudos, dude. Kudos.
Thanks, man. Yeah. Well, and your work's so important too. I mean, there's so many angles to come at things. And I mentioned like you can't sacrifice the good for the best or whatever, the great. It's like I used to like be so stringent with my stuff, my my implements that I would pass up jobs like if they were like, oh well, I'm gonna pull the pull these weeds or whatever, whatever the things were that like and it's hard. More deeper you go down the rabbit hole, like the harder it is for little things. And you have to remember what it was like when, before you knew anything. And you have to have compassion and understanding for the transition period. And I can't stress that transition period. It's so important. Like people have to go through it. And most of the big system things that we're looking to change can't be done. Like we can't just have like a bunch of regenerative farms overnight. We can't just have everybody growing food in their backyard overnight. It's not going to happen. But can we make so the way I ended up kind of looking at it is like I could pass this job up and I could be frustrated, or I could do this job and be frustrated or something, and think about that. Or I could think about the fact that if they hire me and I do some things that I might not necessarily do, like what I wouldn't do on my own or what I wouldn't recommend, they hired me and I'm in there and I'm doing some good, or I'm doing some great, I should say, like I'm doing some great and they're getting to see that great. And that little bit is going to change them a little bit. And then they're going to say, huh, that worked. And often what's funny to me now, and I'm very zen about things, is like I'll just tell the clients if I don't agree with what they want to do, like I'll tell them what I would do. I'm like, okay, but I'm pretty light about it because I can usually tell if a person is like really set on doing something, right? Like, and I'll be like, okay, would you be open to hearing some other thing? And most of the time, if they're hard set, they're just going to keep going forward with what they wanted to do, no matter what. And I'll be like, okay, cool. Like, I said my piece, you heard it, and I actually record almost everything. I do it on Zoom calls now most of the time, so I can record the client conversations. Um, so in case they, say I'm like, oh, I did tell you that, or whatever. Not like I told you so, but like if later on, whatever, like they remember even, but and then and I do what they wanted to do, and then it doesn't work out. It's not on me, because I talked about it and I gave them another option, but I let them have their failure, right? Whereas they, instead of maybe what they wanted to do would have worked, and then if something slightly off of what I did, they can blame the hell out of me for that, right? Versus if it's on their own. So again, it's each individual's journey, and I think it's really important to to meet people where they're at, realize that like let's do the best we possibly can with the situation, and 9 times out of 10, if I have my foot in the door like that with them, like more and more and more good is going to come, and just through the relationship itself, usually it ends up inspiring it ends up changing everything just from the relationship. Yeah, it's like the neighbor analogy, like if you have a neighbor that's like angry about something you're doing, and like uh Jeff used an extreme one in his course where like he had the guy like spray Roundup at him, or no, it was a client of his, if clients of his, like they were doing all this cover cropping, and it looked wild and stuff, and he's always out there spraying his fence line with Roundup or whatever. And they went over to talk to him about it. Hey, could you not spray your Roundup over here? We have an organic farm and stuff, whatever. And he like sprayed them in the face with the Roundup, like, and he was so angry, and just like whatever. And they ended up, I think it was this, but I've had situations that are similar to this, but anyways, you basically like just still become friends with the neighbor. Like you go and you invite them over to dinner or whatever, and you just you become friends with them, and then over like a little period of time, and you focus on the thing that is something good. It's like the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People book, that one, right? Where you find one good thing out of any person that you meet. And so like what's great about permaculture is because you can look at all these different techniques and where they could be applied, right? So let's say he's a heavy equipment operator, or something, this neighbor, and you're like, oh wow, that's really cool, like what kind of tractor, what do you drive, and what, like how did you get into all that, and like, oh, I'm doing a job, like how would you like to have some work or something, and then like you get in with them, and you look at that one thing, you might learn a lot from this person, on that one thing. And next thing you know, like now they feel their guard is down, they're like open more, and then they start like looking at what you're doing, you see you're living a happy life, they see that you have all this fruit, you're like giving them fruit, you're like all these awesome things are happening, you see how happy and healthy the animals are, they see all this, and they're like, one day they just go, so what is it that you're doing here, and it might be that little question, and that just opens the door, and next thing you know, they're composting, they're doing all this other cool stuff, it might not be like this, full on permaculture thing or regenerative thing, but they've changed so much. They're not spraying your fence line anymore. You know what I mean? They're not doing these, and it really comes with these small little things. So I see the value in every piece of it. You got to get in where you can.
Oh, dude, again, preach on. I mean, well, I use the term "kill them with kindness," right?
Uh huh.
Just bend over backwards, and
Yeah.
you're so right about finding common ground.
Yeah.
That's the easiest way to break that barricade down. Um, I've worked with a lot of hardcore synthetic farmers over the year who, one way or another, somebody tells them, either it's an employee or a manager that they've got, that, hey, you really ought to, talk to this guy Leighton. He's got some transitional approaches to getting us off the synthetics. So and so, your brother died of cancer. Man, you really want to go the same way. And the way I break the ice with these guys is because as soon as you say, "Oh, you just got to turn on to biology," you shut them off, right?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't set the hook, right? Yeah, right. And let's face it, most of them don't want to learn anything new. Like, I already
Mm-hmm.
know what I'm doing. I don't need to learn anything new. Get the out of my face.
Yeah.
And so I came up with this term called CNPK. I said, "Oh, all you need to do is CNPK." And they're like, "Well, I know what NPK is. What is C?" I go, "C is carbon." "Well, what is carbon?" I said, "Well, carbon's a lot of things. It could be biochar, it could be root slough, it could be roots, it could be compost. But I want you to understand that the C in the soil will help release the NPK for your plants. So you'll have less to use, and that's going to affect your bottom line."
Right.
"Okay, tell me more." Bing, set the hook, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. You got to speak the language of the people that you're talking to, and know where they're driven. And unfortunately, most farms are in the fiat, fiat, money system, and that's their hook line. Is, I mean, they're fully, um,
Enslaved.
yeah, and I was gonna say committed, but yeah, yeah, for sure.
Click,
And
click.
yeah, I mean, there's no, they have to still be living in that system. To try to talk them to step out of that system now is like, is just not going to go anywhere. You know what I mean? Like, you have to meet people where they're at, and yeah, and like, and if you solve their problem, of debt, which is what it is, debt and everything else, um, then they can look at new things. They can't look you can't you know I mean, there's so many metaphors you can use, but you can't get down the road without fixing your tire first. I mean, you got to deal with, the thing that's right in front of you, and you can't see past that at that moment. So why are you trying to, and they only dig their heels in deeper, especially when you try to tell people if they're doing something wrong. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
which is often the, like, you know beginners entry world. We learn all these things. We go, oh my god, this world is messed up. There's all these things you never seen. You awaken, right, the first time, you see all this garbage happening everywhere, and then you go back to your family, and you tell them how they're doing everything wrong. We're doing everything wrong, like, gotta change it all. Go to your family's house for Thanksgiving, and oh, mom, you can't
Preaching.
use this, you can't use that. Yeah, you're preaching to everybody, and you just become the person everybody avoids. You're not changing people. It's very rare that you'll have somebody that you're changing in that regard. And I think most of us all go through that, hopefully in our 20s, or whatever. But I think we all go through it in some degree when we learn something new. It's just kind of it's like probably our ancestral way of trying to deal with something, because most of the big things that we needed to change right away were like, um, something that would kill you, or whatever. So, we are screaming it out, like, hey, avoid that area. There's a freaking grizzly bear or something, like, I learned that there's a grizzly bear over here. Don't go there. Like, you know, um, so anyways, but yeah, I mean, that's the trans. So, like, this context thing, the transition mindset, like transitioning people, that those are probably the top things that I always try to talk about. And I'm in a very mixed area, but very conservative, place here. Very, and I'm like kind of conservative in most things, but like also very liberal in other ways, and so it's like I can't be put in a box. People don't like that, but like, what I do see is that this sort of stuff, the land, nature, right, is like, it's not political, right? It's, and it's a place where both sides, whatever, both perspectives of looking at the world, the two dominant, right, polarized perspectives of the world, can, the thing that I found where they come together is land. And whether it's appreciating the value of land and, in one way or another, but wanting to see positive value increase of land, and where, like, your personal spaces that you enjoy, whether it's your property you own or whether it's just the local area or whatever it is. Like, I think that we come together in more ways than we're disconnected, but like the land conversation is the most critical one, I think, that can bring us all together. And it's just, you talk about it differently to different groups. And I've gotten so many conservatives on board with permaculture here, whereas a lot of people might not have that success in certain places, because I approach it and I have the conversation in a very specific way, and it's geared towards, like you mentioned, financial is the big one, right? And money is just an equation of energy, really. And so, where I might have a money conversation, or how much you save, like savings, right? That's the biggest one. I can save you a lot, and time is, and people understand that time is value, right? So that's a big one. And then, but I might, that same conversation to somebody who's more in tune with, like, ecological values and things like that, ecosystems, it would be the same thing, but for ecological values and ecological benefits. So it doesn't matter how you look at it, it's the same thing. And I think there's a lot of people, you just don't, it's just because we're polarized, I think that we just don't have that conversation. We're missing so many opportunities um, in this arena because of it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes total sense. Is that, I often say, don't put people on a defensive heel, because as soon as you put them on a defensive position, you're, first of all, you're never going to get anywhere, and second of all, it's difficult to recover from that. And this is a question I'm dying to ask you, but I'm going to give you my example first. So my aha moment, right, when I came out of Rodale, I wasn't even out of Rodale. I was very proficient with a microscope. I love fish. Like, fish are my friends, like in Nemo, right? I don't eat a lot of fish because I love them too much. And I was breeding them. Oh, damn, he glitched. Dude, you still there?
Yeah.
Matthew, you got to reset your camera again, like we did on the last show.
Okay.
Yeah, he's still there, Leighton. Keep going.
All right. So I would bring my microscope home with me, and I would go out to rivers, ponds, streams, and lakes around me. Now I was in the northeast corner of Connecticut, which is, it's like Vermont. It's kind of like where you are up north in the mountains. I mean, you've got a lot of hills. Our hills are pretty big, but they're not mountains, right? But there's a lot of open land. A lot of very, very wealthy people moved into that area and bought up huge tracts of land. So it's not like it's not a suburbia of any kind, right? And so I would be scoping, like I'd be going around to these really pristine areas and taking water samples and then going back and microscoping them, looking specifically for rotifers. And the reason why I was looking for rotifers were, when a fish lays eggs, there's this really critical part where they'll become in the larval stage. I know that sounds like an insect, but what they're called. They're called their larval phase. And it's essentially when they have their yolk sac attached to their body, and they're using the yolk as well as they're learning how to feed off of the indigenous biology, rotifers specifically. So it's a transitional period, because eventually that yolk is going to run out and they have to be living off of the biology or they die. So no rotifers anywhere, and no fish anywhere, no fingerlings anywhere, no salamanders anywhere. no newts anywhere. And it was just the more I dug in, the more depressed I got. And I mean, I got dark, dude. Like I would be back down at Rodale practically crying on Elaine's shoulders going, holy fuck, what have we done to this planet? And she calmed me down. So Leighton, look, this is, I never told you that this was going to be an easy job, but your job is based on everything you're telling me and your passion and your heart that you want to do this, that you want to make a difference while you can, and you're on this planet. You keep saying you want to leave it in a better state than you found it. So basically, I had to go home and go, all right, how do I get out of this mindset? How do I not panic and yell at people like, stop putting fertilizers, right? Farmers, stop doing that, right? You can't do that. You're the wacko in the room. Like you said, all of a sudden everybody wants to avoid you. So I came up with a method of it took some time, but I was able to picture anything without any human influence. So even if I was looking at a dam, I no longer saw the dam, I saw the river before the dam. And again, it took practice to be able to do it this way, but it stopped the depression. Like even though there was nothing there, I envisioned it as it was before we effed it up. And so it helped me transition away from freaking out on people to trying to, like you said, figure out common ground with them. Like, hey, I got this great herbicide that will kill your dandelions, but it won't affect the rest of your lawn. Would you be, think about using this? And the other one was teaching people how to open their eyes. Like I did a lot of work for free early on, dude. Like, there was no work. You know what this is like, right? This is a really hard industry to break into.
Yeah.
And but what I would do is I would do 2 or 3 free applications, come back 9 months, a year later, and I would open their eyes to the fact that I'm like, look at your lawn now. It's moving. And they're like, oh my God, you're right. Look at all the insects. Oh, look at all the birds. Well, where are all these butterflies coming from? Bingo.
Yeah, man.
I got a friend for life. And now they're telling all their neighbors around them, oh my God, you should see what he did. And now I got more work coming in. So now tell me your aha moment on how you handled that panic when you realized, oh my God, I'm over my head.
Meaning, seeing how bad the devastation is.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I had a bit of it before I even got into all this stuff. Like I said, I mean, I was on a kind of a more of a prepper mentality of things. I was looking at social, economic systems, political systems, things like that. I think of these kind of old structures, right? The New World Order, this kind of stuff, right? Like looking. I've always been a person looking for the source or the um, the actual like causation, right? The lowest layer, right? Hidden layer of everything. Like I always wanted to see what's really going on. Like I can't learn something unless I understand all of it. Like I have to understand the whole system, like to actually move forward with my lessons. My teachers hated me growing up because I was the kid that asked a million questions, right?
Yep.
But I'd have people over the years, but more like in college, because I actually, wasn't a wasn't a jackass, but like, and they say, I'm glad you asked that question because, I actually wanted to know the same thing, but like they didn't ask it, but I'm like, I'm getting my money's worth, out of this course. I'm going to ask as many questions as I can. And due to the fact that I literally can't really go on without understanding, well, why is this? Some people can just like take the word as a matter of fact and they just kind of file it in their head somehow. That's why I never did great in college. Like I didn't go on. Like I got what I needed, and I was like, okay, well now I'm going to go do that. I've always been an entrepreneur in that way, but yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, I did the whole thing like with families. It's like early documentaries of the food system and water systems and different things like where it's like it's mostly focused on the negative stuff. And you want to, yeah, you want to help like teach people about it. Where if it's like economic systems, the things that are actual real threats, to your potential family and livelihood, like, it seems more like, yeah, like that's important to get out real quickly. Like I said, it could be a literal safety situation or something like that, or at least it's more palatable for some people because that's part of the conversation that's already happening out there. It's part of the norm to like have different political opinions and like economic opinions and stuff. But like this stuff is like totally foreign to most people, right? So it doesn't translate as well when you try to teach people that stuff. I saw it. Okay, in personal. So I saw it actually happening. I was living up in the mountains. Um, on 12 acres, my family's property since I was a little kid. We owned this property up there. My brother had lived there for a number of years, and then I moved up there when I was like in my 20s, and I watched a clear cut happen, a 20-acre clear cut, literally like one property over that came up about 20 feet to my house, and so I was able to watch what happened after a clear cut. I mean, they don't call them clear cuts. 20 acres is not, they call that select logging. Um, and I froze again, huh?
Yeah, you did. And
Let
plus,
me,
you're kind of glitching out. Like it's weird to see you. You're
I think it's your Zoom that you use is trying to take over your camera. This is a new update Zoom put out that's causing problems for StreamYard. But we'll just have to deal with it, guys.
yeah.
oh, that's a great look, by the way. So it's all good. Anyway, so basically, I'm just going to kill it for a
I was going
second.
to say, just kill your camera.
So yeah, I was able to watch this happen in real time, but also I was able to watch what happened afterwards. So what happened immediately afterwards was wind, cold winds that I never felt before in the wintertime. I was able I had erosion coming down because I was down slope from this clear cut. So I was able to experience the erosion. I was able to experience the heat. It got hotter in the summertime. So I had desiccating fire winds in the summertime. I had cold, bitter winds in the wintertime.
Yeah,
Damn.
we just lost him, so
You think it's
we'll
his
have,
internet connection? Because he did get a little glitchy before. Is he trying to come back? There he is.
I'm here. You can hear me.
Yeah, we can
yeah.
hear you now.
Um,
So you
okay.
ended with that. You were talking about cold winds in the winter.
Oh, we lost. He popped off.
Sorry, I just keep trying to hit the video one, but I'm going to stop with that. Okay,
Okay.
so yeah, I started to feel all these energies start to affect me, and then I watched how the forest regrew, but it didn't come back in the form that it was. It actually went from like a more, I mean, you can't call it a high expression, in its evolution, but it was better, right? It was still like a regrowth from a logging situation that probably happened in the 70s, and this was the second cut. So this was in the early 2000s, right? So, but it turned chaparral, right? It came back as chaparral mostly because it was so dry. All these manzanitas came back, which is higher fire dangers, and so forth, and brushier, and then all the. Are we still here?
Yep,
Can you
you're
hear
still
me?
here.
Okay. And then so the fire, yeah. So it had all these different effects, and so for me that was like, whoa, like a real world right in my face, actually affecting me, because a lot of these things are theoretical. Yes, you learn about, the populations of insects, and you learn about all these crazy things, and you believe it, perhaps depending on the source, but I actually saw it, and then I saw how, like, when I used to walk through that area, right, it was like mushy, there was mushrooms, there was like all these, amazing things happening in there, to like no biomass on the ground, crunchy under my feet, right? And that was the first thing I saw. But I also watched the regeneration, right, of this place, and watching how the succession of that, a few years later, as I'm going through the permaculture thing, learning about succession, learning about, food forestry and how it mimics a natural forest, and then going up there and looking at the native versions of like, a productive planted system food forest, right? I'm looking and watching the native versions of all this stuff happening. The ceanothus acting as the nitrogen fixers, right? The lupines and and all these. So these annuals, you got the annual lupins, and then you have the perennial lupins, and then you have the ceanothus buckbrush. Is like kind of your mid layer, 5 years ish to 10 years maybe, and then you've got your long term, like alders and things, slowly coming on the wet edges, and and so forth, and your large overstory trees eventually coming back, black oaks and things like that, where they weren't sprayed, because they sprayed also the whole place, which, by the way, most people don't realize, like, the one thing that comes back after you spray for a timber forest is, in my area anyways, in many of these, sort of like, in the Sierra Nevada mountains, lower mountains, is the tan oak. Tan oak's kind of like the weedy species of logging regrowth, because if you ever seen a tan oak tree, it's loaded with acorns more than any other. That's why it was the bulk food supply for the native tribes. It wasn't the tastiest acorn, but it was like, we always got it. You know what I mean? So you learn to do a lot with it. It's like your rice or whatever. It's like, and so you would see them coming back. Also, they're very resilient, against things like Roundup and so forth. And even if you killed like a majority of the saplings that came back from all the millions and millions of acorns that are under the surface, even if 10% comes back, you literally have a carpet of trees. And so I watched all of that stuff happening. That's your long-term biomass. Of course, nature is on a whole nother scale, right, than us. So it's more of like 100-year, even 1,000-year scale. When it comes to fires and stuff, these wind-driven fires, I believe it's like it's knocked back many of these places to 1,000-year scale, whereas you're going to have many different degrees of fires, that eventually get it back to the place that it will be. It's not conducive for humans, and it's not conducive for much life, animals or so forth. But it's also kind of like that keep out factor, like it's like the backup mechanism of nature saying, stay away, right? Like, you cannot keep doing the same things that's going on. Like, whatever's happening here, like, this can't happen anymore. At least that's the way I look at it. But yeah, that's one big one that I learned.
What did they spray? Roundup?
I'm guessing. I mean, I don't know. Glyphosate, some sort. That's typical.
Why? Why would they spray that after a clear cut?
So they clear cut, and then they come back about a year later, and they spray. Sometimes sooner, but the next year they come back and they spray, everything that's out competing with the planted timber trees.
Oh, because they clear cut and planted.
And then they planted, yes. So they clear cut, they plant, and they spray.
Got you.
And
I
so
didn't
then,
realize they planted.
yeah. So because, okay, they look at like all the most of these areas. The only crop, it's basically a monoculture, timber orchard, right? That's what I call the forest. Don't call them forests, because they're not. They're a monoculture timber orchard, really. So they have their one species, just like all these other orchards. Whatever it is, anything else needs to go away. And there's no value. They used to sell firewood, as part of the value system, but like, there's not much money in it anymore. And because diesel prices went up and it's just not as efficient, that went out of the picture. So basically, all the hardwoods were just waste products, right? So they wanted to grow as many conifers as possible, timber trees, and eliminate as many of the the hardwoods as possible. When right after a logging or whatever, you actually have a diversity expression that comes back, right? So you have a lot of these like trees that weren't there before because they had logged it and sprayed it and planted a specific group of conifers the last time. But you have black oaks come back, you have canyon live oaks, you have dogwoods, you have so many different species. I'm specific for my area here, right? But like you have a diversity of all kinds of species that come back, and so that's the reason. And then so what you end up with, just like in our orchards, just like in any kind of a conventional agricultural system, you have a few hardcore weeds, right, that take up position. And the more you fight, the more hardcore the weed, right, as we all know. And it's like, so I was able to see that, and then see like and in different places, I started paying attention now to these kinds of things, and very much different, like different groups, how they manage these timber operations. And some are good and some are terrible. I'm not against logging. I'm against logging the wrong way. And it's all, there's all these things are needed. But yeah, like the fire thing, going into a kind of a different road here, but going into the fire thing, it's like I was an avid wild mushroom hunter as well. So the guy who taught me most of the stuff when I moved up there is this old timer. He lived up in Oregon for a long time, and he knew all about wild mushrooms, edibles. He knew how to pick them and everything. He knew how to identify. He taught me everything. And he also cut firewood. So like our big thing was we would go out in the morning, we'd fill our trucks with firewood. We get a forestry service, pass, a permit, and we'd fill our trucks with firewood. And then our way back, after we got our load, we'd mushroom hunt our way out, and we see what we can get. And so I was very intimate with the fungi in the forest, and tromping around through the forest, like experiencing what it looks like, how thick it was, how much it broke down, the sound of the soil underneath my feet, and then in a 10-year period from 2009, well, even less than that, I guess, but like between 2009 to like somewhere around 2015, 2016, the conditions changed so much. I mean, I was getting, hundreds of pounds of like black trumpet mushrooms every year. I was getting hundreds of pounds of morels. I was getting, chanterelles and all these things, which by the way, most of those are all mycorrhizal fungi, right? They're all mycorrhizal. So they're directly, correlation to the health of the trees and everything else, the diversity. Most of those are all in a mixed diverse system with what I've always found is most of those mushrooms are near a larger old growth tree. So like there's a larger old growth tree, I always go to those and then I fan out from there because I know that there's a healthier community underneath that larger tree and connected to it. So that's kind of how I would go mushroom hunting, is I would for these specific ones. But like they were my favorites. But then I saw just a total die off, like from getting hundreds of pounds to like getting tens of pounds, or 800 pounds, or like getting tens of pounds to getting lucky enough to get enough for myself for the year, right? And then not getting any for a year, which was unheard of. Like 2014 or something, 2013, 2014 was like I didn't get any, couldn't find any in the spring. Maybe found a few in the fall. Fall was always a little better time. But like, and then it was just like less and less and less. And then also hearing the sound of the forest under my feet, even in the winter time, where it was squish, squish, squish to crunch, crunch, crunch. And, and like kind of going deeper into my permaculture lens and going, wow, like this means that there's no microbes breaking this stuff down, and what is that? And literally like not able to walk through because there's all these sticks that are standing, and not getting broke down, less and less diversity. And so like I I saw that before the very first mega fires, and we're going through those periods of drought, right? All that stuff is happening at the same time. And yeah, so we had those periods of drought, and then the first big one was like I mentioned earlier, was like the Santa Rosa fire. Eric Olson was working on that. I don't think I was talking with you guys, but I was talking to somebody else. But yeah, Santa Rosa was like the first kind of public wind-driven fire out there that destroyed a large, like in a community, like houses and stuff. And that was the first big one where we're like, whoa, this is like a thing. There was some in Clear Lake, but it wasn't as well, it wasn't out there as much. But then we started seeing them, boom, boom, happening over and over and over. And then fast forward to the campfire, fast forward to so many others. I mean, here in Butte County, it went from the 150,000 acre, right, campfire to then the Bear Fire, which is 350,000 acres.
Yeah, Bear Fire. I drove through that. Oh my God. It looked like a nuclear bomb went off.
And this place that I'm talking about in Berry Creek, that's what burned my house, my house that I was living in at the time. And, that property and those forests that I had been picking mushrooms in my whole life. And so, yeah, so then we had the Dixie Fire, which was 960,000 acres, which wasn't Butte County, but it's close enough. And then the recent Park Fire, which was, I want to say it was like around 600,000 or something here recently. So, and many others, but like all over the place, right? Everywhere. It's like common theme everywhere now. But it's hard for me not to, again, dig into correlations and causations, right, of all this stuff. People are talking about, and we were quick to blame people, blame things. It's just a human nature. Like we want one reason that these things are happening. And PG&E was an easy one for the campfire because it was their power lines that caused it. I'm not one to say, like, I think it's kind of silly in a way to blame PG&E because yes, PG&E's thing did cause that fire that day, but it could have been a cigarette butt, it could have been a chain on the road, it could have been a number of things. Some people having a stupid campfire where they're not supposed to on a windy day, same exact fire would have occurred. The conditions were there for that fire, and the conditions for so many of these other fires that did happen. And again, always looking for blame, like, the Forest Service didn't maintain it enough, or we didn't have enough water in the things in LA or whatever.
Yeah.
That it's like we jump to these simple finite conclusions, like that end all be all. But the truth is like this is a compounding effect from many, many different factors that I mean it's and it directly correlates with the biology ultimately, because the biggest thing that holds water in our forest, creates the coolness, helps grow healthy stands of trees, all this stuff, right? It's all about the biology. That's right, Ken. All of these things, it all comes down to the microbes, but the microbes have food sources, right? And this kind of brings something I actually wrote a note down here was when we think about microbes, right? And we think about microbes in nature versus when we create composting systems and these sorts of systems, what we really are doing is we're actually we're working with we're domesticating microbes, like, in a way. So just the same as, like, you could look at a cattle operation that's like conventional, and we could say that this is causing damage, this is bad thing, or we could look at a regenerative, holistic grazing operation, and we could say that this is doing amazing work. These cows are incredible, right, for this. And most of that has to do with what we're feeding them, right?
Yep.
And the conditions that we're giving them. And so if anybody's ever gone through a holistic management plan for animals, holistic grazing, you have to look at, again, context, your site, what is the inputs of the site, and what's available to you, how much how much regrowth do you have? What is the forage? Like, what is the application to that site? And you might start off and you only have simple things, and you got to go through that transitional period, just like we talked about. You got to use what you can. So if your first thermal compost pile or whatever you're doing is from simple ingredients like alfalfa, hay, or some kind of hay, or and straw, and like manure, like cow manure, and that's all you got. Okay, like you're still doing better, right? You're basically growing bacteria, but like you're bringing your bacterial counts up, right? You're bringing some other beneficials into the play, right?
Yep.
You're working with what you have, and then you know and then as you go forward, you have more ability, hopefully. You're building up your system, and you have the ability to start adding more complex foods into the system, and things like that. So that's, anyways, I'm kind of off track here, but I
And that's
but I
all right.
do have,
That's what we do, man. We off script all the time.
yeah. But yeah, so using what you have. So that's what I like to set up for people, is compost systems that are for their lifestyle and their for their land, and what resources are available, and that sort
Very
of thing.
interesting.
Yeah.
So before we got to continue on the compost conversation, but before we do that, I'd love to just kind of rewind and ask a hard question. Oh, is he gone? No, you're still
I'm
there.
here.
A hard question that is, as these mega fires uh, continue to happen, are you do you believe that this is in many ways a giant evolutionary jump in succession? In other words, when they start to grow back, you're going to get a lot more diversity. You're going to get eventually a lot more variety of animals and everything else, because it's not a monocrop anymore. Or are the logging companies rushing in and replanting the seedlings for their cash crops?
Hmm. Well, some of those answers are hard, some of those are hard to answer because we just don't know yet, right? Because it's it's still too young to know. What I will say is that really hot parts of the fire um, do not grow back well. They're not diverse. Good natives don't really come back right away, and it's very simple, like super backup species that come back. It's mostly just ceanothus in a lot of these really heavy duty, heavy hit spots. Like if it's a if it's the slope that's facing the direction of the wind that was blowing, and it was heavily overgrown, then those places, like I've seen them sit without life growing back for up to 2 years before they even started to grow back. Some of these really simple nitrogen fixing, hardy species, pioneer species. So like, it just always depends. But then you see a side of the slope that like just burned because of the ashes that landed, and it was a good fire, what we would consider a good fire, slower burning. It's still devastating to the trees up top. Most of the time the crown still burned, so even if it was a minor burn, if it was a conifer, that means the whole tree died, right? And if it's a and if it was a if it was like a deciduous tree, a hardwood or something, then it actually, usually burn the whole tree because there was so much more growing, and it's just different. They're designed differently, and so yeah, or it died eventually, or I mean, yes, you have the trees coming back from the base. Don't get me wrong. You have all these trees coming back from the base, and what does nature favor? Nature favors a deciduous, leaning forest. That's the one thing you can get out of this, is that in fire ecosystems, the deciduous forest is always going to be favored. That's why they come back from the base. It's their evolutionary trait to regrow. But that was also like, so one of the big things that I'm doing in my talk and what I've been developing is using a permaculture earth, what do you call it, element analysis, where you look at an element and you break down what are its inputs, what are its outputs, like waste products, and how are they linked together, and what are basically what's their ecological function. And so I'm now done this with this ecosystem, this fire ecology, where I look at what was it like before, um, colonization, and when natives who were in a regenerative pattern were managing some of it, and or the other tenders, which are all the other animals that are part of it. And we often underplay the role of the wildlife in these situations. And so I'll just break those down real quick for you, if that's okay.
Please, yes.
So, okay, so like think about this, people. Like this is what, and I'm talking specifically more for like um, the areas here in the West, the Sierra Nevada mountain ranges, and but it can be applied to many places, different species, whatever. But we had the old growth trees, these massive old growth trees that had root systems that expanded, hundreds and hundreds of feet out, provided an immense amount of shade, canopy, and the genetic stability, which was the big one. These ones were the winners. Like try in a lot of indigenous parts of the world, like you can't have a child as a man until you're like 50 years old, because it means that you made it. It's
Yep.
like the same. We want those strong genetics of the old growth trees, because they made it. They're resilient. It's really, really important, because the stuff that's smaller might burn in a fire, but that old growth is going to repopulate with its genetics, which is really important. Also, the mycology of those old growth trees, I think, as I mentioned, like I think that's massive. Just the biomass, just the water holding capacity, so many other things, wind breaks, fuel breaks. So that's that. Then you have the grazing animals. In the valley here in Sacramento Valley, we had like the Serengeti of grazers. I mean, we're talking about millions of pronghorn sheep, antelope, elk. We had buffalo even came all the way down here. We had so many different things, and not too long before that, like as a crow flies in history, we had the mammoth, or not the mammoth, but the smaller one. The what's it called, mastodon? Yeah,
Oh, right.
we had the mastodon not too far before that. Now, can you imagine what the the ecological function of a mastodon would be for like creating fuel breaks and eating new growth after fire, or and the manure drops of that mastodon, right? Like talk about compost distribution,
Yep.
talk about all this. Okay, so you got the grazers, which then eat the new formed trees. So like when you have one of these deciduous trees burned to the ground, right now you have like 10, 20, 30, 50 sprouts that come back from that base, and it
Yep.
forms like this massive bush. Now, if you had a tightly packed group of 1,000 to up to thousands, I mean 5,000 grazing animals coming through, and people say, "Oh, well, they were in the valley mostly." Well, no, because when it got hot, they would go up and follow the green, right? They would, as the snow melts and everything else, they would go up into the higher elevation slightly, not too high, and then they'd work their way back eventually. But you would have these animals eat that green material, that regrowth, most of it, right? Because they're competing. That's the whole predator pressure, tight packed, herd thing. And then they convert all that into manure in one spot, right? Drop it out. Then you have the microbes are getting fed, right, in the soil. You're
Yep.
having indents in the soil being made. They're literally like feeding the fungi by pushing the carbon, rich material into the soil. And I always would follow animal trails when I was hunting mushrooms also. That's another thing, because I knew that their manures, their urines, these kinds of things actually feed the fungi. And so that's one thing to think about. And then, so you have all these animals doing their thing. So then you have the beaver, my favorite, my spirit animal, damming water flows and spreading water out, creating these oases of life that all these other elements come in. You got the birds in the millions. Again, in the they literally call this Feather River right here where I'm at, because there were so many birds when the Spanish came. There was always feathers coming by on the river, like constant feathers. And I've actually been out to some spots on the river where it's kind of gets a little wild, and like you see these big birds of prey, and you see what you can get a glimpse. Or if you go out into the rice fields way out there and some of these bird sanctuaries they created, which I highly recommend people to go to, like when the snow geese come out there and stuff. We're talking about thousands and thousands of birds everywhere, all carrying seed, distributing manure. And that leads us to the insect populations, which are probably one of the biggest missing elements in the system. Now, they are your major distributors. They are the most, other than microbes, obviously, but they're the ones that can actually travel above surface, not in the water layer, that can actually distribute and create these micronutrients distribution. Their unique way to eat leaves and other things and manures and things like that, and actually travel, distribute. As you know, like there's more microbes on the leaf surface than in the soil, right? And
Yep.
I think, and maybe not anymore, like in some cases, but I think I can contribute most of that to the insect population, which is probably one of the most terrifying of all the different things that has gone on. We lost 60+% of the totality of diversity of insects. Some of the studies show, sometimes some people think it's worse, whatever. So, and that was food to all kinds of life, but birds, distributed it very well. Obviously, landing on trees, directly on trees, and perching on trees and dropping their nutrients on the leaves, dropping it on the crown, around the tree, feeding the tree, essentially. And you could go on and on and on, like to all these different layers of different elements. The salmon, okay, this is critical. The only thing which then goes into the birds, which goes into the bugs, and the whole cycle, but it's the only thing that was bringing critical ocean nutrients from the ocean up high into the mountains, being distributed by bears and birds and all these other critters, and literally just spreading it all around into the forest. And all of that is feeding the microbes, feeding the soil, which is then feeding the health of the forest and everything else around it, creating the sponge effect, holding all that moisture. So that's not everything, but that's where I'm going to stop, because you could go on and on and on of the function, but I don't think most people think about it. About we got the old growth trees got cut down. The populations of all these, we over hunted the forests. We dammed the rivers, we stopped the salmon,
Killed
you
the
know
beaver.
killed the beavers for purses, out of all things, mostly. And then, so the way I equate it is there's two things happening. We got the battery, which is the forest itself. It's the battery. And then we've got the charge of the battery, which is the living systems. So those two things together, right? You've got your phone. Everybody knows your phone, right? So you got your phone. You take it off the charger, essentially, is what we have, or you plug it into one of those weak ass chargers, right? One of those, like, it's the wrong cord or something. We all have had this, right? And it says this is charging at, like, it was going to take 2 days to charge your phone or something. It's kind of what we did, is we removed like 60% of the charge of the phone or of the battery, right? And at the same time, but we had a full battery, right? 100 years ago or something like that. Even though we took 60% of the charge off, we were running on a full battery. So it was hard for us to notice it. But now we're still diminishing the energy input. We're still diminishing the charge, but we're also utilizing the battery. So we're using the battery, and now we're at a place where we're like kind of like at the bottom, like when your phone hits 20%, you know, and all of a sudden you go, oh man, I better do something about this. I'm going to lose it. What happens if I have to make a call here or something? You're on a windy road and you go, oh man, I got to figure this out. And so that's what I equate it to. And so like, you have all that stuff. So every single thing that comes at us, which I think I think logging in the wrong places is actually the biggest factor that pushed it all over the edge. And I have a time lapse of the areas here in Butte County and showing the high desert of Nevada on one side and this thin strip of forest, which is the Sierra Nevada mountain range to the valley here. And then you can look at a time lapse. It's Google Earth, anybody can do this, and look at a time lapse of any area. And you can see the logging over a 10, 15-year period. Now, I had this theory before I even did it. I had this theory and I said, well, I bet you if we were looking back, and I didn't know there was a time lapse of that long that existed, but there is. And you can literally see this corridor be created between the high desert and the valley because they overlogged these specific areas that were like in that corridor. And what it did is it brought in the desiccating winds of the high desert. It changed the wind direction of in different times of the year. And so instead of having a wind that was driven by like the moisture and the cooling effects of the mountains and stuff like that, you literally had the high desert pulled in from the continent, from the continental effect. Literally the continent pulled that dry wind through the forest. That's what created those years of drought. That's what created the die-off of all the remaining insect populations, in my opinion, the fungal populations, the all of the soil health, and then basically it was just a spark that it's all we needed. And then we had the wind-driven fires, and that's what caused them, in my opinion. And I'm looking to prove all of this right now with students and stuff of universities, which we can do all that. We have the wind data. We can show the direct linkage of the times they clear cut specific areas, the changes in wind directions, the decrease in diversity, the drought, every piece of it. Like we can literally show all of that stuff. So, anyways, that's my theory at this point. But it makes so much sense, and like I'm a very simple, like kind of simplistic kind of person when it comes to that stuff, which often is really the I don't know, the easiest thing to do is, but as far as like it's the most accurate one. Usually it's always the fallback. And anyways, so that's kind of where I'm at with that. I think long term, yeah, on 1,000-year scale, I think it's better. It's not convenient for humans at all. It's also not convenient for wildlife so much because, like, we lost a lot of species in those fires. There's no way that the deer or the mountain lions or the bears, maybe mountain lions, but like, there's no way that they had a chance to outrun those fires as fast as they moved. Some of those big ones, so we lost a massive amount of animal population life, and it's still not rebounded in any kind of a significant way in any of the heavier hit spots, which is unfortunate. So yeah, I'm going to stop there for now.
I believe in what you said. I've done a lot of research and studying on understanding wind and the relationship to bare soil and convection. So as the bare soil heats up, it creates a heat plume which pushes up into the upper atmosphere and pushes the rain clouds away. Mm-hmm. And so that's creating a further drought. And then it just compounds from there. Like you said, you get a burn, and now winds can change directions. Mm-hmm. Now you're getting these unnatural fires as a result of those winds being able to fuel the fire. And actually, once, you've seen pictures of the fire nados. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that's the fire being so hot that it's sucking air in to feed itself. And, that's not a typical phenomenon in a prescribed burn or a minor burn. You just don't
Mm-hmm.
have those kinds of conditions. So we are creating what I want to call a downward spiral for nature and evolution. But, at the end of the day, like you said, 1,000-year scale, it's nothing. 10,000 years. Once the humans have been culled, I'm sure some of us are going to survive, but for the most part, once we've been culled, whether it's by one of these psycho friggin' New World Order players, or whether it's by our own hand, let's face it. I mean, if you look at just how sick of a population, and I'll use U.S., but there's a lot of disease in other parts of the world. Maybe not as much in the rainforests and Papua New Guinea and stuff like that, where there's a lot less human contact. But no, we've created a situation where less fertility, less frigging ability to survive. I mean, look at the homeless populations, just exploded. They're
Mm-hmm.
not going anywhere, right? And they're gonna continue to consume resources to the best of their ability, while without providing a responsible component to the human race. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
a plague. It's like getting one of these diseases, and there's a lot we could do about it if the system wasn't so corrupt. But I'll end it there because I don't want to go down that negative rabbit hole.
Right.
But
Yeah.
but bottom line is that, yeah, we have in many ways affected or spun up or sped up the complete disintegration of the natural systems that were in place. Like you said, probably 150 years ago. Dude, remember when I told you how I had to get out of the depression? So
Mm-hmm.
I view everything in the year 1850. When I want to really look at it, I look at something that, like, I'm sitting in a what I call a jail cell here in Southern California. I literally
Mm-hmm.
can spit and hit my neighbors on all sides house.
Mm-hmm.
We used to have what we called the shotgun test in New England. And we would say, "Oh, dude, I'm all set. I'm in shotgun territory." And the next question would be buckshot or slug. So buckshot would go nowhere near as far as the slug would, but
Mm.
basically you could fire a shotgun in all directions without hitting a neighbor's house. So you had some privacy, man. You had some space.
I love that. That's a
Right. And here in
shotgun
Southern
test.
California, I'm in a jail cell. Like, I can hear everything my neighbors say on all sides. Everyone's got a dog, so all the dogs are always barking, and you have zero privacy, and it's kind of sad. Like, I can't go out and take a pee in my backyard. I hate using the toilet because it's a waste of water.
That's my test. Yeah, that's always been my test. If I can pee in the backyard, yeah, then that's a good test. Oh man.
So
Well,
anyway, we have a lot in common, but usually, typically at this point, we are actually 8 minutes late to answering questions, and often
okay.
the questions lead to other conversations that we can have. So I'm going to invite
Well,
Ken
can
to.
I say one real
Yeah,
quick
yeah.
thing on that, just to kind of bring us back into a positive route? Is that the problem is the solution. It really is, and so all those things I laid out as far as like the the actual, like, I want people to understand the problem in its full form, like these ecosystem stewards, like what I call all these animals and the natives doing the good fire, and doing all those things. These were all things functioning, and doing their part, like distributed with relationship in context everywhere they were. And so the way that we get out of this, the way that we design our way out of this, is to mimic those elements, because unfortunately, but mostly unfortunately, we have to mimic. We have to be the ones doing a lot of that work because we're the last ones standing. It's kind of like we have to like unwind it. We have to like bring in the goats to mimic the missing grazers, right? We have to bring in fish emulsion and compost teas and da 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 to mimic the salmon and the the bugs and insect frass and whatever it is. We've got to bring in these things. We've got to do fire mimicry in the form of good fire and other things. So like we have to kind of look at nature's design, mimic that design in the best ability we have now. And then as the natural ecosystems come back, we sort of like unwind ourselves out of the system and allow these elements to do the work for free, right? They do all the work for free all over the place, distributed in millions and millions of ways to do their job. And it's actually, so it can be looked at in a really healthy way, and humans can be looked at obviously in a really healthy, most beneficial way. And it's sort of like paying our homage back to the destruction that our ancestors have committed in some, depending on where you are. So like there's a lot of hope.
I agree with you 100%. And, in my mind, the humans have the wrong approach or the wrong view. Like, we're here to educate, right? We've dedicated to moving the needle forward. What we have to do is get the awareness out so people do understand it. And I am an anti-business dude. I go to your house 2-3 times and I'm gone. I never come back unless you use synthetics and force me to come back. Right. So we need more of this type of approach.
Yeah.
Because, dude, I bring back the whole ecology. Just like I used that woman as an example. I brought her outside and I showed her property, and she was turned to her neighbor's house, which was synthetic, and she was like, "Oh my God!" So that kind of like touched the palm of Jesus's hand to feel the nail hole. Works, but somebody has to do it. You have to have that follow through. So yeah, dude, you're going to have to come back because we've scratched the surface on these kinds of conversations. And,
yeah, this is great.
Yeah, my faith and my belief is that as soon as we're gone, this place is going to come back like a paradise, and it'll all be fine. If anything, it's not about saving the planet; it's about saving the human race, because we're on the teetering point at this point. So anyway, let's get to the questions. We got 4 of them, so we got to try to bust through them as quick as we can. Thank you, Ken.
You bet, guys. And I just want to point out, and you were talking about the bugs, the predator prey model. If we lose those bugs, which are a prey species as well as a predator, and we break that chain, that's when we're really, really in trouble.
Yep.
Yeah, agreed.
So Farmer Cheryl has all the questions today. And I'm not sure if you guys know this. Did Elaine Ingham also invent the compost food web? I've never even heard of that.
What Elaine did was Elaine brought awareness to the understanding that there's a whole microbial ecology, a life system that the human race had not been aware of beneath our feet. Leonardo da Vinci said it best: we know more about the celestial bodies overhead than the soil underfoot. And that is still true to this day. But she was the one that really brought attention to it, and went through living hell, in trying to bring awareness to this, because those that have the power to control all of the money did not want people to understand that they don't need to do anything as long as they bring back the ecology. Now, how do you bring back the ecology? She used compost as the delivery vehicle for getting that biology back into the soil, whether through compost tea, compost extract, or direct application of the compost, the good quality compost, back into the soil. So she's got it all.
And proving the proving the connections between the different microbes through the research that she did, which was probably the most fundamental contribution that she made, was like really, doing that microbial or microscope work, and proving these things, over time. That was huge.
Amen.
Now the next one's kind of off the cuff here. Why are the KNF camp fighting with the soil food web camp, and who's right and who's wrong?
Yeah, there's no right and wrong in this. It's just a matter of ego, and we need to get our egos in check, because we all need ego. We wouldn't survive. We wouldn't be able to live without ego. It's just this super highly ego-driven or focused humans that cause that riff. Matthew had said it best. all of these practices are just hangers.
Yep.
And you can hang your shirt or your pants or your socks or your underwear, whatever you want to hang on them. But they're all just techniques and methods that can even be used together, like two hangers together, because you got a real heavy parka, right?
Mhm.
So, you know, it's just it's a human issue that we like to have control. We like to feel like we're empowered and in charge. And so we take our K and F and we beat the head over the soil food web people with it.
Yeah, and then I think the other side of it is that there's a lot of like being careful thing. And I've talked to Lane in length about this because like when I first went through a lot of her stuff, it was like, anaerobes bad, aerobes good. And like, I heard a lot about these bioferments and like, I was really curious about it. And it was like really, and finally one day she was like, okay, look, like I'll use some ferments, like bioferments, like some anaerobic stuff, but then directly feeds it into the anaerobic system. But it's also like being really careful. And it's kind of like when you talk about something that's new for a lot of people, and you're trying to affect the most change in the broadest sense of something, like we do know, right, that there's a lot of potential places you can go wrong with anaerobic stuff, and that's where you can potentially get diseases and issues. And a lot of our pathogens, a lot of some other diseases come from that if done wrong, right? And so I think it's kind of like a protect, it's kind of like a way to protect the information, saying, look, like if you bring in new people to this whole thing and you go directly into anaerobic systems, like there could be a problem. And then if you cause a problem on a big giant like farm, and there's all this disease that takes over because they did something wrong using an anaerobic system, then they might not want to use anything in the future. So like I think it's also had a lot to do with being safe, like playing the safe route and focusing on, what we do know is like a lot of the anaerobic systems can be a healthier, in general, right? If, in a very general way, it's kind of like almost a lawyer way of looking at it, in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, it's just, not wanting to get people, yeah, fouled up in it. So it's like more of a later conversation. And then I got more into and more comfortable. I was very uncomfortable with anaerobic processes after going through the soil food web school, in a way, because I was like, oh man, like, is this going to cause a problem, but you just have to, you have to learn from the people that have done it for a long time, which is the Koreans, obviously. And that's a very, down to earth. And it was like it wasn't a war driven kind of like a, situation. Is like what they had to use. They had to, because they were cut off, right? So they had to figure out, how do we create for good fertilizers with the stuff we have. And so, it's coming from a different place too. It's coming from a much different mentality, a lot of it. And,
Matthew, did she ever share the story about the PhD student that she had under her who brewed the molasses and fresh manure and poured it on a tree and killed it and then said Elaine's stuff doesn't work?
I don't remember that specifically, but
Yeah. So that's her main reason, and
uh-huh.
her understanding that humans are morons. If a little's
Right.
good, more is better.
Right, right,
So
right.
that combination is a combination for disaster. And she also understands that if you do a really good job for someone, they might give you one reference. But if you fuck someone's shit up, they're going to badmouth you to the day you die. And
Correct.
so everything is stacked against you when you play with anaerobes. Plus, all pathogens come from anaerobic environments. So,
Right.
it was really a very much of a precautionary tale with her.
Yeah.
And I rolled in with anaerobic shit.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Well, a
But
lot of it, like you said, more Leighton, it's don't be a moron. It's all about balance. And if you put too much of one on, you're throwing it so far out of balance. Yes, you're going to kill everything.
the difference between poison and medicine is the dose, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I taught her a lot about transitioning anaerobes into aerobes, and that the anaerobes
Yes.
don't come back. And so she really valued my giving her a different perspective on anaerobes and how even the facultatives make a huge difference when you're trying to restore land. You can't jump straight to aerobes. You lose too many of them. But if you put the facultatives in as like the landing force and then come back months later and put a full aerobes, I can turn land in 6 to 9 months, dude, from shit dirt to soil. So they're very valuable. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to rant and rave. Let's. How many we got?
2 more questions. Yeah. Besides the insects, do worms and snakes also help feed the microbes, the soil, and forest?
It's the whole system, baby.
As long as gravity still works.
I love that answer.
You know,
as long as the gravity works, everything will be fine.
well, it's like, it's like everything is, if you have life everywhere, it's moving things around everywhere, and everything's connected, right? So like, what they say, like your like cells in your body or the air you breathe. I mean, however many ways you want to look at it, was something like, a famous person 1,000 years ago have breathed that air, or, have had those cells. Like everything is cycled through the system, right? So the more life you have, the more it cycles through the system. So everything affects it.
It's all about the components, right? It's not just the biology. It's, do you have the components to build the biology? That's where Leighton's CNPK is really a foundational understanding that needs to be, brought out more and more.
Yeah, that's important. That's why that's why I talked about that. Is the inputs. It's a weird way to talk about compost, right? But like, without understanding that stuff, the bigger ecosystem functions, the big, the big and the small, it's really a reflection of the same thing.
Yeah, just a greater collection of cells from a microbiology to a worm. It's still cells. It all works the same. It's just a larger life form.
Yeah, and it all gets recycled back into the soil.
Speaking of that, my beautiful wife Lily came up with a video yesterday where a guy was buried in a new type of coffin made from mycelium.
Yep.
It totally 100% natural. We'll have to bring it up on a show one day just for the ha-ha.
They're making boats, suitcases, clothes, you name it, out of friggin' mycelium.
Yeah.
So
it's amazing. In fact, one of the largest mushroom facilities now in the world is right here in Paradise, California. And one of my good buddies is working there. Cool. And they're doing all kinds of cool stuff, packaging, everything.
Yep.
So we'll get the last question here. Does the problem being the solution allow multiple solutions? Can you give examples of this?
Well, we humans never learn anything if we don't make mistakes, right? So the problem gets so great that we as a species have no choice but to come together and work together to resolve it, because we're realizing, hey, if we don't, we're all going to die, right? So disasters in many ways bring people together that wouldn't ordinarily talk or be friendly or nice to each other. So yeah, the solution starts with education, because if you can make an intelligent decision, you will make the right decision generally, unless you're, if you take money out of the equation. But if you take money out of the equation, then generally you'll come to a solution that is responsible. I hope I answered it. Matthew, you got some spin on that, baby?
Well, I will say for the disaster stuff, it's like a forced focus. It's very much like a funeral. When people, come together in a funeral, it brings a bunch of people together. You sort of have some, you are careful and you're thoughtful and you listen more, and and you think about things in a much deeper way. And it's just like, it's an opportunity to rethink about things, to reflect. And like I said, it's forced. In the permaculture thing, with the idea that the problem is the solution, is also the idea that you have to look at it in a different way. And so, meaning like, it's the common things are like it's not a snail problem, slug problem. It's a duck deficiency, or it's a it's a uh, or it's not a mosquito problem. It's a mosquito fish deficiency. It's a protozoa deficiency. It's like how do we use life as the solution? Is what it all comes down to for me. It's not be against something. Let's look at something we're going to be for, and increase the things that are positive and decrease the things that are negative, or at least outweigh them, in the long run. That's kind of what I mean by the problem is the solution also.
I love Gabe Brown's expression. Uh, he always uses this, that every day I would get up and figure out what I had to kill that day. And then I
Yeah.
learned about how great it was to get up and think about what I was going to grow or what I was going to grow out that day. So it's a
Hmm.
mind shift. Just you see
Yeah.
it perfectly, Matthew. It's the problem is the solution. You just got to biomimic nature. And dude,
Right.
I can't wait to talk to you about this one. So there's a woman that did a study back in 2017 or 18, I believe it was, related to the California super wildfires. She created a whole new line of biology called Understanding Protozoa, Fungi, and Bacteria on Smoke, Ash, and Embers.
Hmm.
And this
Interesting.
plays right into my one of the lines often use is that before mass human expansion, there was mass migrations. So you can't tell me invasive species are evasive. They were constantly being redistributed across the globe. And then you add in the wildfire, the smoke, and the understanding of the desert, Sahara Desert sands traveling across the entire Atlantic Ocean and
Hmm.
fertilizing the jungle, the Amazon. So
Hmm.
we just have this narrow, focused human, like we control, control, control. When in reality, nature's in control. We're fighting nature instead of being stewards of nature. That is the message that I think could potentially turn the tide on the destructive nature of humanity, but it's going to take time. And unfortunately, humans only last 80 years, so we're in a hurry to get things done. And that's
Right.
probably our worst enemy.
Well, and I would just say that that's, I would think that that's likely in the form of good fire, right? Like, and way to look at, like we need to have a lot more fire happening all the time, but good fire,
Yeah.
right? Because this the I actually don't believe that a lot of those microbes actually live just like the other biology, right? Like I don't think it actually lives through like these super out of order fires, right? Like I think it is out of nature's order because it came from an out of order system. Now maybe I could be wrong. I mean, I want to believe in good things, but I also think a lot more, lower intensity fires all the time and breathing a little smoke all the time rather than heavy duty toxic smoke
Yeah.
filled with people's houses and stuff, right? Like is going to be the way to do it, So, yeah, I've actually, now that I understand the concept and I have heard of the concept of that, I'm interested in looking into that stuff. That's pretty cool.
I've been trying to get her on this podcast for about 2 years now. And
Okay.
sooner or later, I'll get her. But she has been going through a transition, starting her own lab. First, it was getting lab space, then building a lab space, now getting clients while having children and married. So
Oh
she's,
yeah.
yeah,
Little
she's and
busy.
being a scientist, like doing the work too. So
Amazing.
yeah, yeah. Sooner or later, I'll capture her or get her on here because when I first read that, I was just blown away. Because, dude, I swear there's microbes in fire.
Yeah.
Maybe they're a
Yep.
whole different species, like archaea living on the bottom of the ocean floor,
Uh-huh.
of
Yeah.
toxic gas. Right? We know microbes can eat electrons and shit electricity. So why wouldn't they be a part of fire? Right?
Right.
But again, it's probably a science that won't be discovered in my lifetime, but I'm willing to bet maybe not the whole farm, maybe a quarter of the farm, that someone sooner or later will discover fire has life in it. It breathes, it consumes, and it excretes. Those are the three main things for life.
Yep.
Love it.
Now we're at the 2 hours, guys, but Matthew, I really want you to talk about the chorus and your projects before we end the show, because I think it's really important, some of the educational stuff that you're going to be bringing out.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you. Well, right now, what I'm working on right now is it's going to be a educational series of basically it's going to be a course training through the ecosystem restoration communities, and that's going to be we're going to start marketing that in September. It's supposed to release in 2026, February of 2026, and the way I'm describing it is it's the most up-to-date, holistic course on wildfire, these modern wildfires that we've been facing in the world, and it's looking at on global scale, like so I'm not, again, context, I'm not teaching you how to do something. I want people to understand the functions of these systems, the why, when, where, the who, all that stuff, so that you can come up with your own how. And then what we're hoping is that then the different ecosystem restoration communities around the world that are in fire ecologies, which more and more it's places you would never expect actually having these issues, so that they can have actually on the ground trainings specific to their bioregions and their ecologies, so that we're not like trying to preach something that's not true, that we're not trying to tell you how to do something, you try it out in the Amazon, you go, I tried that, it didn't work. It's so that's a big part of it. I'm really excited because I've met so many amazing people in this arena, that are, and a lot of this stuff is really new knowledge, and it's been a lot of learning over the last 7 years, as far as like the tech and dealing with the Western, and dealing with governments and that kind of stuff. Obviously the indigenous knowledge as well, that's been forever, as far as the dealing with good fire and understanding the ecosystems and things like that, is also going to be included. So that's going to be one of the big things I'm working on. You can catch me at treetoppermaculture.org. Like I said, I do consultancies. I do. I'm trying to do a lot more of this kind of stuff. So I'm doing a lot of talks and podcasts. I'm starting my own podcast, which will be part of this course that I'm doing. Is I'm actually starting my podcast as kind of part of that. So I'll be doing that, and you'll be able to see that throughout all those same places, treetoppermaculture.org, and my Instagram. I think you posted most of this stuff up, right, Ken? I believe.
It should all be in the description, guys.
Yeah, so you can check me out there. I do. I'm a landscape contractor also now, and I do a lot of earthworks, and so that's kind of one of my big things is setting up systems, and I've actually focused a lot to the hardscapes, because I believe that it's the underappreciated, and there's not that many people who have like a whole systems design mentality that are doing that work. It's most like people planting trees and compost and all that, which I love. It's like the icing, if you will. But what I've learned over the years is like it's really how you set up that property, the access, the water systems, where you put the structures, and how to retrofit older sites, into a higher energy order, and so that everything that you do on the software side, right? I'm going to use Matt Power's regenerative soil kind of breakdown as like the computer analogy. We got the hardware and the software. The hardware is the hardscapes, the roads, the water systems, all that, the structures, and the software is the living systems, right? It's if you don't have the bones, the hardware set up correctly, your software is not going to do so good. And so I've been a lot more focused on that. So I do a lot of consultancies and designs now for people. And then I also can help do the work, but I actually appreciate going in and like just helping people find local contractors where they're at, and sort of teaching them a little bit, working with that contractor locally, so you have a long-term person that you can work with, not just me coming in from somewhere else, and doing the whole job. Although I like to do the work too, but I want it to be regenerative, right? So I want you to have local relationships. And so that's those are the kind of the big thing. Oh, don't forget, actually the school garden program. The thing that I started a permaculture school garden program here in Oroville. If anybody wants to ever come and check it out, it's a demonstration site, both the actual like food forest and the nursery and all the living systems that we have there, but also the program itself. It's the thing that I'm really most passionate about out of all the stuff that I do. It's hard to believe all the stuff that I do. Sometimes people go, "What?" But it's because it's like I'm sort of setting up these things, and then I get people to run them. And I'm sort of a big systems guy, so I think that through the children and through these school programs, that's why I went to that. It's not because I want to necessarily do that. It's because I know that it's the best path forward to creating the most possible change and actually hitting the kids in the early years when it's when it's most important, and it's just naturally they haven't been corrupted yet by the Western systems, right? So it's so second nature to them. It's so like duh, by the time they're 3 years in my program, if I get them in kindergarten, if I'm lucky, by the time they're in third grade, it's like, yeah, mycelium, duh, like microbes, duh. Everything is like so easy, and they know all these plant species, and just so that child, coming up in the world is going to have a way different lens on everything. And so I call my program Cornerstone School Garden Programs, and I've created the first actual funded like position in our local county that is a model now, so that I can create these all over the place. So I'm trying to teach more people how to create them. And it's a low energy system, and we're actually making money in the school as well for the program. So it's got a regenerative financial model and stuff. And so, yeah, I'd love to help set up more of those for folks. That's a big one. I'd see, and we've created a nursery that's now getting trees out to the community. We just donated like $10,000 worth of trees to fire survivors because of the program. Anyway, so those are my big ones. Like that's the big stuff. So check me out, treetoppermaculture.org and stuff.
Hey man, I really appreciate you doing the work, bro. You're a young pup. You got plenty of years ahead of you, and you're doing it the right way through education of the youth before they're corrupted. So, big kudos to you. Thank you so much for sharing and being giving us two plus hours of your time to come on here and help get the word out. And Ken, as always, thank you so much for all the time, and energy, and behind the scenes work that you do to put this together.
Yeah.
And do you have any further housekeeping that you'd like to get out?
Well, we have James Perky, coming on with you next week. It's been a couple of years since he's been on. I know we're going to be giving away the course again here, starting really very soon. Just got to talk to Perky a little bit more about that. And hold on, let me bring him back up, Matthew. Of course, myself and Andy Lopez, the Invisible Gardener, on Wednesday. Thursday, chiropractic is sexy again. But guys, there's so much to this. Remember that, it's all about the cell division, and who controls cell division? The biology. So put in more biodiversity. Diversity in your gut as well as in the soil. But other than that, guys, we will see you on Wednesday. Matthew, stick around, and we'll talk a little bit after the show. Peace out, everybody.
Peace.